So hello and welcome to my podcast. It's Learn Reiki and Connect, and it's with me, Tracy Matthews. So I hope you're well as you listen into this week's discussion. And of course, this is a place where we are helping each other to connect with that light within. And I always make reference to the fact that this podcast and in my work, I really like to help people to make sense of the physical life experiences. And this is really seeing through the lens of our soul, because this really helps us to get a sense of our truth and understanding. And then we can really get a lot of what we're going through from the cause, rather than just simply trying to work out why we're experiencing what we are. So I'm just going to jump right in. And in this week's podcast, we are really looking at and talking about uncomfortable things to do for growth. So how comfortable are you on your path and your spiritual journey right now? You know, what's going on for you? Are you struggling? You know, you might, for some, it could be mental health or physical health. That might be an area that is being flagged up for you, that you're having to deal with that. And that's why there's a struggle. And of course, it's really challenging. Maybe it's financial lack that's not getting better, no matter how much you're trying. You know, you either can't generate, can't make, or can't keep hold of money. You know, whatever it is, it's causing some level of hardship and struggle. You know, for some there may be sort of feelings and challenges around relationships, trying to find love. Or maybe that they're getting into the same pattern every time. So that sort of kind of leads us to a point, well, are you stuck on your path and you don't know how to create something different? So we're going to be looking at this. We're going to be looking at, why do we experience uncomfortable growth on our spiritual path? You know, I'd also like to share what I've learned from the perspective of the soul doing the Akashic records, and that has to do with what's called life lessons, and why your soul consciousness will create experiences for growth. So please stick around and stay with me, stay tuned, and hit the subscribe button. And join me every week as we look at various subjects. So with that being said then, I'd like to start with, well, what does being uncomfortable look like? And then also just sort of follow on with that, well, why do we experience uncomfortable growth on our path? So let's look at what it looks like, because I'm a great believer that we need to understand and give some cognizance to what we mean and what it could mean for ourselves, or when we're observing a loved one and those close to us. You know, what does uncomfortable growth look like? You know, perhaps you've sighed, why is everything so hard? You know, it's almost like the very thing you want or you even desire is just not happening. You know, it's almost like it's the same old, same old. Well, that's a cycle of want, you know, which is something that's not showing up for you. And it's uncomfortable when you're in that. You keep doing that month after month and going on years, that's uncomfortable growth. It's tiresome. You know, and there's only one thing left. It's either a person sits in it or a person will break the cycle and create some level of new change. You know what? Here's another one for you. Misalignment. When something's just not coming together. That thing, misalignment, you know, it throws everything off. And the worst thing is, you don't know what it is, but some of us can sense it and feel it. And oh boy, that one used to get me, because I used to sit in misalignment and I used to sit in it for a very long time, And I went long periods. And I began to realise that I was missing subtle signs, essentially ignoring my intuition. And how that played out for me, well, I'd make a decision, for example, and I used to stick with it, even though I could feel that something was off with that decision, or that I didn't get the results from that decision and choice that I made. And that baffled me. But I could feel and sense it was off, but I'd just override it. So in other words, I would override my gut feeling. I knew something wasn't quite right, and then I'd get stuck. And of course that would set off for me a whole chain reaction. Anxiety, stress, I'd feel low, and it took me some time to understand my reaction to that. I had to understand the reaction so that I could change what I was doing. So maybe that resonates with you. Maybe that level of uncomfortability, knowing that something isn't right, the misalignment, things aren't coming together, it is going on for you. You might not have even realised what it is. Because that's what I find most things are. We don't know what it is. We just seem to be experiencing it. Sometimes we don't even have a word for it. I sort of kind of put these kind of uncomfortable types of growth when we're in different parts of our journey in life, kind of unconscious, because it seems that we're going through the motion and we just keep doing what we're doing and getting the same results. Now, opposite to that, there are life-changing experiences. They're the kind of things where it changes, it leaves an imprint. That's loss of a loved one. It might be a serious accident, not only for yourself or maybe for a close family member, and you are greatly affected by that. It might be sickness and health that has really suffered and we're having to deal with that. Or maybe it's a mental health decline that really affects us and our loved ones that surround us. So with whether it's those kind of big, what I call life changes, where it's not only with ourselves but our others, or it's the subtle things that are going on, it kind of leads us then, well, why do we experience uncomfortable growth? And for that answer, we need to change our lens and to look through as our soul sees it. Because I'd like to share really what I've learned through my understanding of the Akashic Records. And because that has to do with what's called life lessons. And when I started to understand this, it changed not only how I felt about difficult challenges and experiences or hardships, but it just meant I was able to deal with it differently. So I'd like to share that with you. But, prior to that, I'd also like to share with you how I viewed my life and my journey to that part. And I do mention a little bit about this in the previous podcast that we were talking about this, how to connect spiritually to God. Because I did mention about belief systems, how they can be part of our journey. And there's no judgment to this. It just is, and how we grow on our path. And why I reference this, because I had previously, before I kind of understood what life lessons were, I was kind of really looking through the lens of what my belief system had told me. And that kind of was that I was sinning, and that there was a sense of good and bad. And I remember from these feelings that it wasn't good, because I wasn't feeling good enough, because I was struggling all the time. I always seemed to be struggling with something. and struggling sort of denoted that there was something bad. So maybe that sort of strikes a chord in you. Maybe you can remember that sort of really bad feeling of that you were always sinning, missing the mark, that you weren't good enough for God, you weren't good enough for Source, and it kind of led you down that path. So maybe you can sort of understand that and know what that felt like, or simply identify. But I guess for me, when I started to sort of see it through the soul perspective, it was not about sinning, essentially. It was actually more about learning. And I found that really quite fascinating. And there was quite a shift with that. So it's really more about learning. And here's why and how. Because before we are born and we come into our physical lives, we meet with loving beings. We're part of Source. And we make a plan, and we have guides, spirit guides that are not in the flesh. Some do come and guide us through our lives, but we also essentially have those that are non-seen and angelic beings that really kind of help us through this physical human life, and with the life lessons that we've basically essentially chosen. Incidentally, if you want to find out a little bit more about these spirit guides and why we're not alone, you might be interested in that podcast and I've entitled it You Are Not Alone. And that's so much fantastic insight into spirit guides. So essentially, we have all that support and help. And when it comes to a life lesson, we are involved in that. In fact, we choose it. I'll let that sort of sink in with you, because that sort of, that was a big shift for me, that I chose certain experiences around that. So yes, we have life lessons. So what does that mean? Well, life lessons will mean that we have certain experiences as a soul that we want to go through. And what I've noticed and I've seen from my referencing into reading for others and for myself, there's normally a primary, secondary and a third kind of lesson. And what that does, it kind of rounds out the whole experience. Now, this is the thing. We will have both positive and negative experiences with whatever it is that we said that we wanted to come and experience. And I'd like to add, the focus is not about good or bad. It's rather in a context of positive alignment. When we are on the path, we know who we are, we're listening to that inner part, and that sort of brings about that flow and that alignment and that path. And there is also the experiences which have its place. And when we term the word negative, it's not really that it's bad, but rather that there is a negative misalignment, a negative trajectory, that perhaps that we are experiencing ourselves away from Source. And that's quite a big thing. I had quite a bit my own revelation last year about that. And it's so interesting. It's not bad. It's not from Source's point of view. It's just that we label it as good and bad. But they are experience, and we experience ourselves through these experiences that sometimes that takes us off another route when we're not close to our inner self. In fact, we're kind of having or going down a road that's far away, but there's no judgment to that. Whether that is in a human experience, a life that we're here in the flesh, or whether that is not, with our flesh and bones, as it were. But from a soul perspective, there seems to be no judgment. And sometimes we need to get our head wrapped around that, because we judge. You know, we have our little judgy selves, and we try to sort of work through that. And that kind of is a process. So we kind of arrive, what the soul perspective is, at life lessons. So what does that even look like and play out in a person's life? Well, for example, I'm going to use this as a very simple one. Somebody might be here to have all the negative and positive experiences around love. So that will be both, as we said, expressed in love, in a aligned way, and in a misaligned way, the absence of love. You know, depending on what that secondary and third, that will also enhance that, but it will also add to the absence of love. And that's going to be played out, weaved into the intricacies of a person's life. You know, I'm just using love as an example, but I've used and certainly seen with others that I have read for, and I've seen for myself. When I got to this part, basically what I saw, what my soul had chosen, it resonated. There will always have a ring of truth. And I found that incredibly empowering, because what that did for me, it took me out of things are just happening to me, that I'm a victim in this. Because like I mentioned, you know, when you're struggling and things aren't going right, we seem to have a preconceived idea that we should be happy all the time, that life should be wonderful. And yes, it can be, but we can also experience the exact opposite. You know, and I've always had conversations, and I've always thought to myself, as like I said, with others, and I've come to my own realization, well, how do we know what love is if we haven't experienced the absence of it? How do we understand happiness if we haven't experienced sadness? So it's almost like there is that polarity, and that there is one side of the other that rounds the whole thing. So what does that sort of feel like to you? Maybe you're aware of this, or maybe this is kind of like a new concept that we're here to have a bit of both. You know, which leads us to, you know, why a soul will always create growth. Now, I'd like for you to sort of stick around and sort of stay with me for that. You know, as we sort of like just share that, and how being uncomfortable has really kind of got to do with, which I have put into sort of two categories, which I've been in, and I've kind of sort of like helped others with. And normally that sort of is in two areas that we might find ourselves. One is when we're in that uncomfortability of stuckness. You know, maybe that sort of kind of resonates with you. So what is that like when we're in that stuckness? So we're on that journey, it's uncomfortable. Well, you're not going to feel good. There is going to be an uncomfortability for sure. And there it is, my friend, that misalignment feeling, where you know something isn't coming together, it's not gelling. In fact, if anything, you're having no alignment, you're seeing the opposite to it. And we kind of don't know how that we're going to get to it, because we're kind of focusing really on the end result of whatever pattern that we're in. You know, it's always expressed with kind of stress. You know, when we're stressed, we don't feel at peace within. And of course, that creates anxiety. There's a restlessness. And we might be going through waves of this in our lives. But essentially, there's kind of a stuckness there. So I would ask, you know, at this stage, and this is where we can find a lot out and understand sometimes some of these symptoms that we're in. Where are you with that? Is that uncomfortable growth that you're in more of a stuckness? It might be that you're kind of trying to maneuver yourself out of the stuckness, but you don't know how to get out of it. Maybe this is the first time you've realised that you are stuck. Because whenever we're in that energy, it never feels good. We're always kind of dealing with some level of struggle. There's going to be some challenge. There's going to be some hardship. You know, you might desire change, but you're not sure of how you're going to get there. And then to add on to this, we might be going through physical health. We might be feeling at our lowest of the low, you know, and whilst we're on our spiritual journey, it's confusing. And it's actually where you begin to feel that you kind of not measuring up. But this is the beautiful thing of the soul journey, that we are just as powerful when we are going through this uncomfortable level of growth, even when we're stuck, because we're still learning. We're still learning on what it feels like, how we're going through it. And sometimes we might sit in that for quite some time. That eventually we kind of get to the point where we change something. The pennies dropped. Maybe we've been moved to start doing something. And this kind of brings us into the second area of uncomfortable growth. And this is when a person's in the energy of doing. You know, you might have been stuck before, but now you've actually are in that energy of doing. Now, this uncomfortable growth, there's going to be an element of, there are things that you're doing that will make you feel that perhaps you don't want to do, but you found a way that you're doing it. And that feels different because you feel good. There is parts of that path, although there's problems, you've changed your reaction. You know, there's a great saying out there, it's not the problem that's a problem, it's your reaction to the problem. So, you know, this is not miraculous that we've, you know, transitioned into where that's all fantastic. No, there's always going to be a level of uncomfortability when we are on our path. But the difference is that we're finding a way to do it. So you feel good. So you're doing, you're creating, and you're kind of finding a level of enjoyment in the doing, even though you might feel uncertain, a little bit frightened of some of the level of growth and steps that you're doing. You might feel a little bit fearful or scared. And here's the thing, there is an alignment. Whereas before, when we're stuck and things are not quite gelling, what you're noticing, even though there's parts or there's bits that's uncomfortable, there's alignment. So there's a flow because you're finding that you're doing things. So this is quite an interesting part because we can go through phases of stuckness and doing. And especially, you know, as we sort of progress and we get on our journey, I have found that, you know, when we get on the path and we're doing it, even though there is this element of not being comfortable, there's certain aspects of it. There is also that enjoyment, and there's that connection to the inner voice. You know, I talked about how when I was in misalignment, I didn't listen to that intuition. And maybe that's just struck a chord with you. You know, where are you at right now? Are you in that energy of stuckness, where the growth is kind of really uncomfortable because we're going on and maybe we've sort of exceeded our time there? I know I did. Because I kind of sat in it because I was waiting for someone to get me out of it. You might have heard me mention previously, I was waiting for God. I was waiting for something, waiting for the universe, waiting for someone to come and do something for me. And then I kind of maneuvered onto, and yeah, I'm going to call it what it is. I found it quite excruciating because I wanted change, but I didn't quite kind of want to do the things that I needed to do to create the change. You know, it's like starting anything new. It's hard. So then I found and maneuvered myself on parts that were kind of still a bit strained because that was coming from me, but there was the magic there because alignment. There's a flow because there is that energy of doing. You know, and this is really incredible, and especially when we look at our life lessons and what we said that we wanted to do here, then we kind of get a sense of, well, you know, we're not victims, and that's a journey in itself. You know, you might be kind of resonating with that and nodding with that. Who of us haven't felt that, you know, kind of feeling a little bit of a victim here? That, you know, things are happening to me. Well, when I kind of realised that I had sat and I'd looked at what I wanted to experience and that I was going to have both experiences, I actually found that quite liberating. You know, even though I perhaps didn't like some of the things that I was going through, I've kind of realised, well, I've asked to experience this, so let's just get on with it. What am I going to learn from this? And I might like to add, for those that are in the energy of doing, you might relate to that. You know that you're here to do something. That your higher self, that inner voice, that bigger me, that part of you wants you to do something. But you're kind of a bit reluctant. Might be a little bit scared. Or you might have done or have been doing what I did. For a little while and I dug my heels in. I'd even got to the point where I actually didn't want to do it. And when I didn't want to do certain aspects of the path, of my life lessons and what I said I'd wanted to do here, I kind of got stuck and I kind of got in that energy because it wasn't giving me happiness. Because we know there's an inner feeling. We know when it's not quite gelling. We know when it just doesn't feel right. We know that when we're on a path, when we kind of said we'd go down there, but we kind of want to go this way, when it doesn't feel so good. You know, and sometimes, and this is really quite fascinating, I've talked about this in previous podcasts, where we reach a point where we've actually put where our soul will get us on the path. It's like we've sort of knew that we would get to a certain juncture and that we kind of sort of wanted to go off, but it wasn't part of our path. And our guides are loving and they nudge us and gently or sometimes quite firmly will put us back on what we said that we were going to do when we got to a certain juncture, a certain point in our physical life. So where are you then? Are you stuck, or are you at the part where you're doing? And there's no judgment. There's absolutely no judgment about being stuck. It's still part of the growth. So what can you do then if you found yourself, but you are kind of more on the stuck element of that uncomfortable growth that we've talked about? Well, the only way out is in. It's that part of where we need to listen to the inner voice. It's the getting back on the path, which is sensing, hearing, knowing, and just how it is for you, the pit of your stomach, or you'll just go, yeah. It might be the very thing that perhaps you're a little bit uneasy, or maybe you're not too sure how you're going to do it. Getting out of that stuckness is going within. And it might mean, and I've talked about this, that we might have to find some time to do some inner voice work. That might be meditation. It might be time alone in nature. It might be that piece of music. It might be that time alone that you just haven't had for some time. What is it for you? Because sometimes if we can find that space, that can help us then to maneuver into meditation. Or it might mean that we are now going to use the power of our intention to connect with that source energy. That part of where we kind of get stuck can be a challenge, and it's difficult. Maybe there's no time. Maybe that's the thing. There just doesn't seem to be no time to do anything like that. And maybe that is something that you will need to look at in order to get yourself out of that stuckness. And incidentally, I just want to share with you that I've been in both, and I think you can tell by that. I've experienced stuckness and also that energy of uncomfortable growth that when you're on the path, but you're having that element of doing it. I stayed far too long, and in fact, good portions, even months, and I had, I'm going to be honest, a decade where I couldn't manifest. That was an uncomfortable, stuck learning, which I had to experience that. And I'm glad I experienced it. But I don't choose to put myself into that longevity because I've had enough experience of that now. So when someone's been stuck for a very long time, I understand it. And there's no judgment to it. It just is. We're going to experience certain life themes or experiences because we have chosen that. And we're going to have the good and the bad. Or looking through the lens of our higher self, we're going to be aligned and misaligned. They're going to be things that will happen to us that will be in its absence. And they're going to be things that are fulfilling and enjoyment. And I guess, when we think about it, how many of us have grown when we've had the most challenging and difficult experiences. It is beautiful to have lovely times and good experiences, and they are there. But how much do we grow when we've been through something that's been hard? And at the end of it, there has been a change, a shift, an awareness, and that consciousness that we have now seen things differently. And do you know what? There's nothing like going through something that you've stayed in it too long, that you are not going to go back in that again. It's a bit like if you come out of one relationship, you've been through whatever, you're not going to go through that again. And it's a bit like that. We learn through our challenges, our mistakes, and how to do things that feel better and that are more aligned to who we are. It's the growth. It's why we come to our planet, and quite often is referred to as a school, because this is where we learn. And when we're on the doing part, it doesn't mean that miraculously that there isn't going to be no uncomfortable growth. Oh, yes, there is. But the alignment, being connected to that inner voice, listening and doing creates that energy of inner joy. It creates a warmth and a flow that far surpasses when we are stuck. When we're in patterns, we're just doing the same old thing because that's what we know best. And sometimes I think we get used to it. Or maybe we don't want to change because we know that change means that we've got to do something. And it might mean that we need to sit in that until we're ready for change. So I'm going to ask again, which one are you in that uncomfortable growth? Is it the stuckness, which doesn't feel quite good? It never does. Or there's a level of resistance, there's something going on. There's some hardship, there's something that's niggling us. There's going to be some level of stress, no time, exhausted, anxiety. The desire to do is there, but we just don't quite get there until we've absolutely had enough. And like I said, we've all been there when we're not going to do that again. Just not. We've been there, done it, and worn the t-shirt. And that's all good. There's no judgment around this. But when we're ready to change and act and do, that energy is different. And even the level of uncomfortability in our growth, because we can see beyond that. We can see around us the difference and the alignment, that the flow. And I always say, what's going on around us is always a feedback to us. And what I mean by that, if things are happening, if difficulties that were before that were stuck, and then you start tuning into that part of you, that intuition, it's almost like synchronicities. Doors open, flow happens, opportunities arise, and that feels good. What might have been an absolute slog before of hardship, then there's that flow. And I've experienced it, and it is wonderful. So we just need to tune in to that part. That's a part of you and I that loves us. It's connected to that bigger me, the higher self, and it's having a human experience here. And we are going to have both sides of the coin, however way we want to term it, good or bad, aligned or misaligned. There's nothing wrong with it. It is experiences, and there's so much love and support for us when we start to tune in to that. And of course, when we're on our doing and we get on that path, and there might be those of you that there's things that you need to do, but you don't know how to do it. I hope that this has been something that you've been guided to. Perhaps when we're in our stuck state for years, I didn't even realise I was stuck. I was simply surviving. I was simply reacting to what was going on around me. And maybe this podcast, maybe something you will go on to read that will just put you in the right direction, that you're able then to maneuver, and I always like to say that before, when I viewed struggling and challenging as something that was missing the mark and I was sinning, I actually view it as beautiful now. It's a good indicator that we are learning, we're evolving, and we're growing, even if we are stuck, because there will come a time when we can get out, and that's normally when we've had enough. So I kind of hope that's given you a little bit of food for thought. It's helped perhaps to help you within whatever that you're in now. And I often think, and I was mentioning it on the last podcast when I was, or one of the ones at my worst when I had a loss and bereavement in 2018. You might want to have a look at and listen to that one, where it was dealing with death. And when I lost somebody, I literally was sat in the car and I was just had a sense, my inner voice said, just turn that on, listen to it. And I did. And what I listened to changed everything. It was the very nugget of information that I needed at that time on my path. And it helped me to maneuver and get out and get through to the next part of my journey in my life and my experience. So I hope that this has done the same for you, and it's helping you just to connect with the light within and help you now just to identify that stuckness and how you can get into the doing. And that doing means that we're going to have to do one thing that will change that energy. But when you do, it will shift and will move you forward where you need to do. And to listen to that part of you. So I hope that you found, like I said, this is something that was very timely for you. You might want to hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss any of the other podcasts. And I really do love sharing. And incidentally, I've mentioned it before, one of my digging of my heels is actually using my voice, sharing. And that happened to me with teaching and sharing Reiki, and also in getting my voice out there and just letting everybody know that we're in this together. So I understand if, there are those that are feeling reluctant and feeling a little bit sort of like, well, how can we get out of this? So hit the subscribe button, because I'm on YouTube, Spotify, and I'm listed on other platforms. You might like to visit the website learnreikiandconnect.co.uk. You're going to find a couple of things there, home learning of the online Reiki courses. That home learning will help you to go within. I do everything from the course content with the in-person, and I've done it in a way that's going to really help you connect to the light within. Get rid of that hit and miss and tune in to what's already there so that you can hear that part. Or you might like to work with me over Skype learning Reiki. Reiki level 1, level 2 and 3A. Or you might like to do the QHHT hypnosis, the past life regression that I studied with Dolores Cannon. You might want to go and find out a little bit of information about that. And of course the Akashic Records. And just what the Akashic Records and that kind of information can do, and how it can really help us to move forward when we are feeling that we're in the same patterns and cycles, and how to get out of it. And if you'd like to perfect the art of dowsing, you might want to look at how to speak with your higher self using the pendulum. These are all things that I have used and I continue to do myself, so that I'm able to continue in that energy of doing, even though there is an element of comfortable, within the growth and on our path. So I really look forward to speaking with you again next week. And until then, do take care and bye for now.